Here's my note first.
Don't be a.
That's my note by my computer or by my camera.
My new fee on life is always be a.
That's why you're not working for homework, you hole.
Hello and welcome to Table for Five with no reservations. Take a seat at the table for a fresh, sweet, salty, tart, and pleasantly bitter conversation.
Hello, thank you for taking a seat at the table. We are doing our 14th series, and this is going to be our big feeling series. Tonight, we're going to be talking about grief. So it'll be a little heavy of an episode, but we think it's a really important thing to cover. And seated at the table is Rachel.
Hey, everybody.
Tabitha.
Hello.
Jamie.
Hi.
Jen.
Hey, everyone.
And I am Kim McIsaac. So I think we're going to start with Jen tonight.
I always talk about processing the diagnosis, which is what I wish I would have done for myself. And I think in processing, it allows you a little bit of time to grieve what's just happened. And I know a lot of people have their opinions on whether you should grieve a diagnosis. I have always said, I felt like I grieved the child I thought I would have.
Yes.
And didn't see the child in front of me. And I've been very open and honest about that. I think you grieve, for me, I grieved the life I thought my daughter would have, the life I thought I would have, the way I thought I would parent. I mean, everything changes when you have this life-altering thing change. And for me, the grieving came in waves. And then I would say probably it's just been the last couple years where I think I've really accepted this is our life. It's such a flippant term. It is what it is. You know, I can't change it. We can only work on it and move forward. But I still have days that I grieve this life. And when I see my daughter struggle, how hard that is, because, you know, that's all wrapped up into autism. So for me, that's what I grieve. In that grieving process, a lot of things change. Relationships change. Your outlook changes. I was speaking to a vendor today, and she shared with me that she lost her son at 6 years old from leukemia. And she said she had actually really never shared that. She said, absolutely, at the end of the day, it's all immaterial and doesn't matter. I know when I die, there won't be a list of all the things I owned that are going to woo people. It's all about your character, the people you support yourself with, and the memories you make along the way. So I was like, and she was talking about how she came to that feeling while she was grieving her son. And it was just kind of ironic that we talked about that today because we were doing this episode tonight. So make the memories. You can't change what is, make the memories. And I was like, oh, yes. And we talked about all the grieving, and she talked about, and so, yeah, that's, for me, that's like, it was grieving, I think, the life I thought we would have and how hard things are for my daughter.
Do you feel that you felt that grief right away, right when she was diagnosed, or did it take you some time? Like, did you understand that that's what was happening?
Yes and no. Immediately I sunk, but then I think I went, for a couple of years, I was kind of in a robotic, we got to get this fixed. We got to get in every therapy we can get in, and somebody help my kid, that kind of stuff. And then when it really sunk in, I think it was when it was kindergarten, seeing her next to peers, that grieving process, that whole wave changed, if that makes any sense, right? Seeing her in that setting next to her peers. So it came in chunks for me, but it's really just been the last couple of years and the strides she's made that I think we're on a track now that I can see a little bit ahead and not feel sick about it. And that's the truth.
Yes,
that's the truth.
So I have this quote that I found that I wanted to read. I have a couple of them, but I thought this one was really good. And I'll tell you who it is, but I never heard of her, so I don't know if she's like somebody who's known or not. But it says, there are 3 needs of the griever: to find the words for the loss, to say the words out loud, and to know that the words have been heard. And that's by Victoria Alexander. And I looked at a bunch of them, and that one really stuck out to me because I can just relate with that. And I know a lot of people get very confused when special needs parents talk about a grieving process that we go through, because a lot of people associate grief with death. You know what I mean? And obviously our children didn't die. We have our children, and we are so grateful for our children, as we are all of our children. But there definitely is a process. There is a loss that you go through, whether it's the loss of the life you thought you would have or that your child would have. I mean, everybody perceives it and thinks about it in a different way. And I think that when people are forced to push those feelings down and not acknowledge them, I just think that is detrimental to a person, because then you're like almost like shamed and made to feel guilty about it. And that's one of the reasons we thought it'd be important to do this episode, because we want people to understand that like it's understandable to have these thoughts and go through this process when your child is diagnosed, and it's normal and it's healthy, and it doesn't mean you don't love your child, and you should be able to talk about that, because I feel like that's what helps you. Talking about it, you know what I mean, helps you. And then when you realize that other people have similar feelings, I think that is like a weight lifted off of you. So yeah. Jamie, do you want to talk about like your feelings around this?
One of my big themes recently of my writing and just of where I'm at in life is grieving myself. And I think, especially in this community, but I think in general, we talk a lot about like grieving who we thought our child would be a lot, but Jen said, and Jen also mentioned this, like grieving who she thought she was going to be. And I think that's a big thing that us as special needs moms have a hard time doing, because we don't think to grieve ourselves. We're thinking about what we wanted for our child and what life's going to really be like, and the hopes and dreams we had for them. And I think part of that really is letting go of those things within ourselves, but also grieving who we were going to be. Like we had a whole episode where we talked about career goals or what we thought we would do after we had kids, and how our lives completely changed. And it's something that like I think a lot of parents kind of go through that in their own way, because I think sometimes parenthood is more than a lot of people figure it's going to be, or we're not in the situations where we can just afford to do what we would like in our lives. But I do think it's an important process for us as parents to actually grieve who we thought we were going to be. Like if you thought you were going to be a success in such and such area of your life and you're not, to grieve that and let go of that and like recognize that in yourself. I was reading an article today about self-grief, and this is from the AEDPs. This is their definition of mourning for the self. And it says, grief of the self, a painful but liberating experience of compassion for the self. And I love that, because a lot of people can come off like as if they're being pitiful, like self-pity about themselves. And really it's about, you have to grieve yourself to move on and to recognize those things in yourself. And so like a big thing I've been working on is mourning my creative side in a lot of ways, but then recognizing how that's shifted in my life now, like seeing the areas I'm being creative in, mourning like what I thought my family dynamic would be, and that it's not that, and what I thought my children's relationship would be, and my role in that is different. Like I play a different role than I thought I would as a mother. I just think it's so important for moms sitting out there to be able to like look within yourself and mourn who you thought you're going to be in whatever which way that is, and let go of that. And then you'll be able to move on better, instead of, for me, it was becoming resentful towards my life because it wasn't at where I wanted it to be at. And I needed to just let go of that and grieve. I mean, it's still a process, still doing it, and grieve where I was.
No, and I think that's a really good point, because it becomes about our lives fundamentally change when you have a child. When you have children, period, your life changes, you know. When you have a child with special needs, your life changes in ways that like you can't imagine. That's why I feel I get so frustrated when people criticize moms talking about this, because your life changes. You take on different roles. Like it's just, there's so much that you're not expecting. And it is just, you know, it's part of, sometimes there's lots of things in life that can do this to you. But, you know, you have these thoughts in your mind and these goals and these things that you think your life's going to be like. And then it changes in a way that like you can't even really wrap your head around in the beginning. You know what I mean? But that's like really good points, Jamie, that it's like you kind of grieve the loss of the person that you thought you were becoming before you had a chance to fully become that person. For some of us.
And
like,
it's
really.
okay to feel that way, because like you and I both said, a lot of people criticize us for having those feelings, but I think it's healthy to go through that process.
So another quote that I put aside was, grief is the price we pay for love. And that's actually by Canva.
Oh,
And I did hear somebody say that grief is love. And that just like resonated so much with me, because that's exactly what it is. And I think there's a lot of confusion about like, what do you mean you grieve your child? Like your child isn't sick, your child is here. And there's a lot of shame surrounding this. When I went through this with my daughter, obviously I've talked about this many times, that it was a different time. And there wasn't a lot of like support groups and a lot of information. I went through this. It's like, I didn't know that's what I was doing. I went through obviously the different stages, but like didn't realize until later. Like I ended up reading about it a few years later, and I was like, oh, and it said that you go through the process almost as if the same process as someone who loses a child goes through. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. And it's like, I feel like I kind of blindly went through that, but didn't really have a name for what was happening. And I feel like it's a lot of back and forth. Like, I feel like in the beginning, it's such shock. It's almost like you are in a sort of denial. Yes, I know that my child's autistic. No, I am not realizing that this is a lifelong condition for her. In my head, I am thinking, okay, what do? We get her therapy, we get her speech, we're going to do ABA, we're going to get into the special preschool, and they're going to do all these things with her, and they're going to make her better, and then by the time she's 5, she's going to go to kindergarten. That is not what was happening. But that was my form of denial. Like that was what at that time I could accept. Obviously she was autistic, she wasn't talking, she had many of the signs, but like I couldn't fully wrap around like this was forever.
Yeah.
That took a really long time. So I feel like too, a lot of people try to put a timeline on acceptance.
Ugh.
I personally feel like it's kind of like the grief where it's like, yes, you accept it, but there's little pieces that you don't fully accept at first. I think it takes time, and I think some people go through these things where they think they're in acceptance, but you're not, because when you reach a time where there's aggression, when you reach a time where your child is hurting the other children that you love and protect, when they're hurting themselves, when you can't bring them in the community, when you lose relationships, friends, can't go places, then you're in a whole different set of circumstances. So I feel like it's very back and forth. And then I feel like you go through the anger, I just remember being so angry because like, why? And it sounds so stupid now, but why? Just over and over that this went through my head. Why her? There's
That
all
doesn't
these
sound
kids.
stupid. Sorry to pause. Sorry, that does not sound stupid.
Like, was I not supposed to do that yesterday?
Yeah.
I don't mean like stupid, but I mean like, it's like I was stuck on that
Yeah.
for a
Yeah.
while. Like, why her?
And it
It's
pops
like,
up like you were
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah.
and it's like you look at her and it's like, but how? Like she's just this beautiful little girl. How can this be? And you see all these other kids and you get all these other kids running around, and it seems like everybody else is perfect. You know what I mean? And then you have your child who can't do things, who can't tolerate things, who can't, you can't bring her to the beach on a whim. You can't just go and do anything normal that everybody else can do. Like I couldn't pick her up and go to a different park. I didn't know. Is it fenced in? Where's the parking lot? Like how high are the structures? Like what kind of stuff do they have on the ground that she's gonna eat? Like just like all these things, and it just felt so unfair. I got stuck on that for a while, but then I feel like you evolve and you kind of learn and grow with your child, and then as time goes on, you become more understanding of like this is your child's life. This is your life. It's like Jamie said, well, didn't exactly say it, but like what she was talking about was like, my life is changing now. You know what I mean? I'm not the mom that I wanted to be. I thought I was going to be the mom that like had all the kids at her house, that was carpooling for everybody, that was going to have the sleepovers. My kid would attack other kids. That couldn't happen. My kid would run around the house naked. That couldn't happen, and to see my other kids kind of lose out on things, that's another grieving process, because like they didn't have the normal childhood that I also thought that they would have. So it's not just about the special needs child, it's about the whole family, and it's about the way it impacts everything. It's like a snowball. So if I feel like when people are critical about like, oh, you just need to accept your child, it's not about accepting your child. Like I love my child more than anything. You know what I mean? Like it has nothing to do with like the way, if you love your child or not, or if you accept your child or not. It's just going through this huge change that I never saw this coming. Do you know what I'm saying? Like I didn't know there were kids that didn't talk or like what autism was really, or, I feel like when I got through my pregnancy and had a healthy child, like I was through the, you're like, okay, we made it. Like she's healthy, everything's great. And, I just think it's just a very intense process to really, I feel like, understand. And I don't think it was until she was like 6 or 7 that it fully like hit me that like, This was not just like a thing that was gonna, of
We're
course,
gonna grow
aspects
out
of it get, well, yeah, aspects of it get better. I mean, she's 100 speeds away from where she was when she was younger or where they thought she would be. And I'm so grateful for her. But I wish I could tell people that, like, I'll never get over it. I'm never gonna get over it. Like, it's buried down deep. I don't dwell on it. I very rarely compare her to people. But if I allow myself to do it, me and Jen were on the phone the other night as I was trying to make her feel better. And I sat talking
You
about it
did.
and I started crying. Like 24 years in, it still is painful. It is still painful to really think about certain aspects. Like, who was I talking to the other day? And we were talking about Alyssa being 26. So when I was, so we went out trick or treating the other night and we got a couple little sideways glances. And I think that one lady thought that Alyssa was my niece's mom. Like, you could see the confusion when Alyssa also had a bucket. And Rachel, I think it was you I was talking to,
Yeah.
that was like, oh, that's so weird to think that she could be someone's mom. When I was
Like-
26, I had 3 children.
It's
I was
weird to
married.
think that when you were her age, you had all these kids on that driveway. Like that's, you know, I mean, it's just like, whoa.
Yeah.
But I
So-
also think you were saying something like you were talking about the like 24 years in, or even when she was 6 and 7. And I think I said it, but I think that grieving process changes. But I also think things spur within that grief: anger, sadness, resentment.
Yes.
I've always said it's like everyone else's lives carried on, and of course they would. But I felt abandoned. Do you know what I mean? And then there's a grief
Yeah,
to that
and
part
like
of your
it
life.
is like a little bit of jealousy, in certain aspects. I think social media makes it really hard sometimes to like just
Yeah.
be in that own bubble. I had the luxury of having more of that than you guys do because we kind of lived in our bubble and didn't really realize where all this was exactly supposed to be. You know what I mean? And then it's like when
Yes.
you said, then you see them around certain kids their age, and it's like, I have a nephew who's the exact same age as Alyssa. They're months apart. We didn't see him all the time. He lived in a different state. So then every now and again, once a year or whenever it was when I would see him, it was such a jolt. This is what she's supposed to be doing. This is where she's supposed to be. And I know people say, oh, they're who they're supposed to be, blah, 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 blah. I don't believe that. I just believe that there's something either in her genetics or her DNA or the environment or whatever it is. I don't believe that she was supposed to be a child for the rest of her life. I don't believe that. I don't believe she was supposed to miss out on relationships, on friendships, on being a
I agree.
mom, having a job. It is what her life is. And we damn sure make the best of it. And she's happy and healthy. And those are the 2 most important things. And I will do anything to bring her joy. And I don't care what it is. I will go to whatever lengths it is to make her happy because she deserves that, because she doesn't get to experience a regular life. And like I said, do I sit there and cry about it every day? Of course not. I go months without thinking about it. I can go 6 months without ever getting sad. But it could just be that one little thought that creeps in your head or something you see. And like when I was thinking about the fact that like she's 26, I was a mom times 3 at 26. I had 3 children. I had been married for 2 years. I had gone to school, you know what I mean? Worked all these different jobs, already lived and experienced life. And she doesn't get to do that. She gets to be with us and she gets to be home and all that stuff, but she doesn't get to have these experiences. And sometimes it's like, it just hits you and you're like, it's just like a wow moment. And then I wipe my tears and then I go on with my day and, I don't think about it again for maybe it'll be another year, maybe it'll be another 6 months. It's not like it was in the beginning, but it is a painful thing to watch a child struggle, to communicate, to watch them not be able to understand certain things and navigate the world in certain ways. Because I want to ease that for all my children. You know what I mean? Like Alyssa is not the only one in this family who has struggles, clearly, but I can talk everybody else through their struggles. I can't really talk her through things because she doesn't understand why things are upsetting her. So it's like, I can't tell her and she doesn't understand everything that I'm saying to her. So, it's a really hard thing sometimes. And I don't think I'll ever quote unquote be over it. I never will be. And I don't think I'll fully ever accept it because there's still in the teeny corner of my mind, I'm just still waiting for that day that she's gonna wake up and be like,
Kimmy, you said fundamentally earlier, and I've written several times, right, where I've said it has fundamentally changed me as a person.
Absolutely.
And how could it not, really?
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm,
and in some ways that all these blessings are brought into your life
Mhm.
because of autism and
mhm.
because of Alyssa. And I wouldn't know you guys. You know what I mean? I wouldn't understand the gratitude in the simplest things that life can bring. I probably wouldn't even notice those things if it wasn't for autism.
Yeah.
I think there are beautiful parts of it, and there's nothing wrong with having autism or being autistic. And I'm not saying that. I'm just talking about my personal experience as a mom, as a person. My other children's experience. It's been hard on them too. So it's really hard to just be like, oh, okay, like I've accepted it and I'm, ready to power through. And I think you do that, but like there's always little sidestep, especially when things are hard. It's so easy to be accepting when things are going great. It's like, okay, well, things are looking up, they're going pretty good, but I feel like there's always some little surprise that's lurking around the corner. Anyways, that's my take on grief as far as diagnosis and autism. Oh, I can take a breath now. Who wants to go next?
Tabs, go girl.
So when we were preparing for this episode, I was like, what am I going to talk about? What is there to say about grief? I feel like I've lived a lifetime of grieving, honestly. I grew up in a mountain of adversity, which I don't generally talk about on my page or on this podcast, and somehow by a miracle came out as a person with a degree who got a Juris Doctorate, some kind of miracle situation. But my entire childhood was basically a circumstances of watching others have things that I didn't. And so I think that's something you learn over time to accept about yourself, and it also gives you grit and resilience, which is a benefit to you. Like I think everyone's talked in the landscape of autism and how that's affected our lives. When my kids were diagnosed, well, specifically when Nixon was diagnosed, because he was our first kiddo who was diagnosed with autism, I went through what Kim was talking about, is like, why us? Haven't I lived enough life of pain and suffering, and not because of my son, but because I don't want my child to live in a world where it's not set up for him and it's hard for him and he has to do therapies instead of doing after school programs and struggle to learn skills and be misunderstood and all the things I felt about myself as a kid, kind of. And then when Nora was diagnosed, it was like a sweeping brick of grief. I felt grief with Nixon. With Nora, it was life altering, I would say, her diagnosis, because she had typical development. We kind of thought that things were going the way that they should go. And then it was like a loss of language and a dramatic shift in her as a person. And when we got her diagnosis, I kind of flew into like months of grief. And it was a mountain of many things, that I already knew what we were facing as far as advocacy and therapies and all the supports you have to put in place. And then I kept going back to this thing of like thinking that I could not do this. Ugh, I'm gonna cry. I knew I was gonna cry, people. Get ready for it. But I think the grief for me comes a lot from like feeling inadequate as a person, and not so much in relation to like supporting my kids and knowing that they'll be okay because they have us to back them up and cheerlead for them. And I think, like Kim was saying, autism brings a lot of things into focus in our lives and kind of makes you shift what you thought was important to now what is important. But I grieved over both diagnoses, and I also had a very traumatic birth experience with my son, which was very uncommon, and I almost died. I was in the ICU for a long time, and so I grieved over that. I mean, my parenting journey started with grief, and all these mountains of things come back to that, like how much can one person kind of take on and heal from. And so we had the two diagnoses, and you guys know, but I haven't talked about this publicly. I haven't written about it. We moved across the country, and mainly that was due to Nick and I getting divorced. And this time frame of my life has been filled with grief. I mean, and it does center around love. I mean, you build a life of another person. In January, we would have been together 20 years. So we grew up together, we're kids together, So I've been processing that as well. And my nephew passed away pretty dramatically in the midst of all of this. We just hit 2 years since his passing on Halloween. So there's been like just this mountain of grief to overcome in my life. And I have shifted and changed as a person. I'm trying to come back to like who I actually am. And grief isn't linear. You can feel fine for a period of time, and then something will hit you, and the grief is unstoppable. You can't stop it, the train from coming. And you can live there for a little while. And I think what people don't understand about grief is that you just don't get over things. I mean, our kids' autism diagnosis, we learn and grow and become better at managing as parents, but it's not that you can just overcome or have that go away forever. You know, I mean, I've struggled with the fact that doing this by myself, and I don't really want to talk about too much about his perspective or my kids' perspective on what's happened, but parenting 2 kids by myself is hard. It's really, really, really hard. And add the layers that come along with an autism diagnosis makes it 10 times harder. And then add in that I'm trying to heal as a person from saying goodbye to my career and my husband and our family structure. It's pretty big feelings, no doubt about that, you know? So if listeners made it to this point through my crying, the real thing is that I think we've said this before on the podcast, like it's unfair for someone to tell you how you should feel about something. And we are not dismissing our children by having feelings. You have to walk through those feelings to come out the other side. And sometimes that takes being in a fog, or, you know, rediscovering who you are as a person, or giving yourself time to understand whatever's happening around you. And sometimes you can't manage as a human being with everything that's been thrown at you. I mean, grief's a real there's no doubt about it.
We
And
love you so much, Tabitha.
yeah, it's a hard run for me right now. And it's hard to talk about publicly. It really is. And I mean, people are gonna, this is the most asked question. What happened? Nothing happened. I just told you what happened. There's been 2 years of bombshells, and we got together when we were kids. You know, I mean, that's what it boils down to. There's no like mystery circumstance why we're getting divorced, and we co-parent our kids fantastically still to this day. We're on the same team when it comes to our kids, and some of that can be filled with grief. Being together, supporting each other is also very painful. So it's great for our kids, and I think fantastic, and I will do it. I will swallow any feelings in order to make things easier for my kids, but it's hard. So there we are. That's the grief.
Love you, friend.
Grief. Oh,
Oh,
Well,
Tabs. I love you.
I
so
mean,
much.
I think that there's gonna be another mom out there who also probably doesn't want to talk about all of these things that you just talked about, and you know, maybe this will help somebody, because it is just all hard stuff.
yeah.
Ugh,
I recommend therapy. I'm just
or at least
gonna-
chocolate cake.
a shout out.
I was
to
like, I
therapy.
recommend some red wine, but you know,
Yeah.
don't take advice
Yeah.
from me. It's fine.
One more quote, and then we'll hear Rachel's perspective. Deep grief sometimes is almost like a specific location, a coordinate on a map of time. When you are standing in that forest of sorrow, you cannot imagine that you could ever find your way to a better place. But if someone can assure you that they themselves have stood in that same place and now have moved on, sometimes this will bring hope. And I just thought this was really beautiful and so true. And I think this is why it's important to talk about it, because there's somebody out there that can't imagine being where we are now, you know, with our kids or whatever it is that we're going through. And that's Elizabeth Gilbert from Eat, Pray, and Love. I've never seen that movie, but I like this quote, so maybe I will. Rachel, what are your feelings around this?
I feel a little bit like grief has been a common theme in my life and a common feeling in my life, although it's always been a little different. Like I have some typical grief, like the death of my grandparents, who I was super close with, and sort of I feel like dealing with that so young. My family helped me to kind of honor it in a systematic way, like 7 steps of grief, hospice book style, and like kind of just learning that these things are okay. And so I think I processed those, like the mourning of, and like processed my grief in a very healthy way, in like the finality of processing someone's passing or death. You know, the stuff I have not been so great at is like I think the common theme around some of my biggest lessons in grief has been around adoption, both in being adopted, that for some, being adopted means being abandoned. For me, I was raised in a way that I believed from a very early age that my birth mom made this selfless choice. And now I know there's a lot more to that. But I feel like that was like a helpful tool for me to process sort of that I maybe didn't fit in one way, but I was welcome and chosen in the areas that, like, if I didn't fit with my family, I was still the one that was picked and honored. And I was given this chance to have a different life. And later on in our adoption process, we faced a grief that is sort of hard to navigate because it's not often talked about. We had a parental grief. Like each time a baby was about to be ours or a child was about to be ours and the circumstances changed, we had to deal with the loss of something we didn't even have. And that's hard to talk about because people don't get it. You know, like if they're at my house, they can see that there's an empty nursery, or they can see that there's a door closed, or like busted Kleenex in the crib. They can see it when they're there. But as we all know, when you're actually helping someone through grief, it's not just the moment that you get the call or that someone passes or that it happens. It's like this long-standing thing. It's like the nursery's still there tomorrow and 6 years from now and still empty 8 years from then. And, you know, for me, I feel like all of that, like to Tabitha's point earlier, grief has given me a grit. I believe what I've gone through helped me to be strong. And I feel like in the light of having such little expectation and such big hope and such big love left, like all I had was love left after an adoption process like we had. That heart where it's so broken and so raw that still wanted to be a mom was able to accept Celie in a different way than if I had not lived through that experience. I feel like where my grief is today isn't in the adoption stuff. It isn't in possible foster care and like someone being in our home for a short time and leaving. It's more wrapped around the guilt. Like I feel like I'm mourning my disappointment more than I'm in grief. I'm processing that people don't actually care. I'm processing that in so many ways, the school isn't right. The medical system isn't right. This is not right. This is not right. Like there's so many different places where we're not the right fit, or she's not the right fit for them, or she's too much this, or we're too much that, or whatever. There's like this disappointment and this like, I cannot believe that this is true. Like that it isn't just my paradigm or my bad attitude or I'm at the wrong clinic. No, all the goddamn clinics have a wait list. Nobody can help my kid. Like those deep, deep, deep feelings of like, well, accept the facts hit so parallel to grief to me that it's just like this roller coaster of disappointment, denial, rage, straight rage. Like really, like it so parallels the grief process. But I don't know that it really is that for me. It's just like, I don't know, maybe I'm the one in denial. I don't know if it's grief. It's like complicated though in that same way. I will say, because we're talking about grief at large, one of the other ways that we've had to deal with grief in my life most recently is that my mom passed in the beginning of the pandemic. And the way that we navigated that with Celie, and I know that all of our kids are so different, but for us, we just gave her facts, as few and as many as the questions required. And we tried to give her a tool, like a thing to hug. And we tried to give her the words like legacy, like Augie might not be here, my mom, but we have this way to honor her, or we do this to celebrate her, or a blanket to snuggle her, or whatever. Ultimately, I think all of these things teach you to be a good listener and hopefully to be more empathetic and resilient. I don't know. I can say of each of you, the grief that I faced has brought me to this strong, witty, and funny Canadian, this stay car for me and read my books to me and tell me the truth when everybody else is off the call, Kimmy, and sweet Jamie. I'm so proud of all of us, Jamie, like the way that you were able to verbalize your experience in this recent podcast you were on rocked my world. Like, I'm just so proud of the progress we've all made in our 22, 7, 2, 3, 4 years in this journey. Because Tabs, like, high five, big hugs. I think without this whole emotional thing, we wouldn't be so vulnerable to be as good a friend, and we wouldn't be able to be here for one another and like live in that I'm sorry that it sucks and that's all we can say part of our friendship.
I was just going to say for what you were saying earlier, because I wrote a piece and I think I wrote it better than I'm going to say now. I was just trying to look to see what I said. But I was talking about the ongoing process of acceptance. Like acceptance is never finite. I think especially for, we see that in autism a lot, but even like with what Tabs is going through, or when you lose someone, you're always going to be reminded. There's going to be a little thing. You're going to wake up in the morning, you know, like I know for me, after I've lost someone, you wake up in the morning and you kind of forget for a second and then you remind yourself all over again. But I think like how you're talking about that parallel in your life, that's all part of your grieving process. And I think it's that ongoing acceptance that it's never ending, like Tabs was also saying, but it's all connected. Like it's just all reminders of those things. And like we can accept little parts of it and we can slowly move forward. But I want you to know you're justified in feeling.
And it is a circle of love. Like, I mean, one thing that if I've learned anything over the past 2 years, it's that when you need it the most, people give you what you need if you can open up and accept it, which I have a problem doing, and being vulnerable and telling people I need help, even if you don't know what that help is supposed to look like. And this idea of like a linear grief, like you're saying, it will hit you. I mean, I wept because I had to take my garbage out, my own garbage, and the garbage can was tipped over. And then I had to pick up the disgusting garbage can, and I'm 5'2", and it was such a big garbage can. And I hate taking out the garbage. And in that moment, I was hit with the reality that I'm alone. I'm alone in this house as I'm picking up this goddamn garbage can. And it's moments like that that hit you with there's literally no stopping it. And that
it really is the little things, Tabs.
Yeah,
right?
It
like
is.
It is
The perfect song on the radio when you have to go to 14 IEP meetings and the last thing on earth is you want to muster up energy to fight with people about your kid and try and teach them about your kid. I mean, it's moments like that that hit you and you are blown away by the grief and all the other feelings that come with it, rage, sadness, not having a choice. And I feel like grief really lives in that concept that something happened to you and you did not have a choice in that circumstance. And I will say that about my divorce too. I did not go into a marriage thinking that 20 years later I would be trying to move my way through a divorce. And that's no fault to Nick or myself, but it wasn't realistically a given choice, even though people might see it as that way, as that is what it is. You know what I mean? So I think when we talk about people shaming people for their grief, how are you not supposed to have all these layered feelings in something that you had no decision as it being a part of your life? Losing someone or having a child that has an autism diagnosis or a disability. And to me, this divorce feels like a dramatic loss, you know? So
Absolutely.
And I'll say the pressure of autism at Tabitha, and then 2 children. And statistically, they say it's 80% of marriages are impacted by a diagnosis. And so I think for a lot of people, it's profound. Again, it fundamentally changes the people.
And I for sure.
And I'm not speaking for you, but you know what I'm saying? No. Statistically, you just change.
There's no doubt in my mind that in general, having my children changed me as a human being. Right. Prior to autism diagnosis, just in general, mothering in itself changed my focus. And some things don't make it through that. They really don't. You know, they just don't. And that includes other close relationships you have.
I was going to say.
I mean, it just doesn't make it through that. And I'm an unfiltered person as it is. Add autism, loss, and divorce. I mean, watch what you say, people, to my face.
I think there's such a yin, there's like the yin and yang or whatever to what we're saying. You know, with this grief comes strength, with this like struggle comes the grit, with all of the stuff. But you know, Jamie touched on it a little bit. I feel like there's this sense of self that you change, and when you're in like the slump and you have to get out of that. Otherwise you're just in the struggle, right? Like, so you have to pick yourself up. I feel like constantly I've had to be like the river, each season as this river flows, like it's still flowing every year, every day, every whatever, but it changes because there's a dam over here because a tree fell unbeknownst to the river. Like,
Yeah.
because there was a rock slide because of a big storm that had nothing to do with the river. The river has to divert and go this way. Now it's a little muddy. Then it's going to be clear. Then it's like all the seasons change this river, but it's still that. I totally lost my sense of Rachel through some of these periods where you just didn't realize that it isn't a phase of grief, but that you've let go to give. Like, you're just in the hard. And I'm trying to keep in this phase of where we're at, a few years into diagnosis and fighting for what she needs and hearing no all the goddamn time. And I still need to find Rachel and like keep myself healthy and keep myself okay and fulfill my need, even if that means I'm painting a silly thing on my wall or trying to figure out ways that I can like fulfill the love that I have to give, because I don't pour out love and get anything back in the way you'd think. Like, I could spend a day and a half with my daughter serving her every need and she doesn't actually know I'm in the room. I could put out 1,000 emails or 1,000 calls. This one place doesn't even answer my calls or my emails, and it's just like endless. It's endless. So like keeping attached to myself and my power and like keeping it together to keep propelling forward takes some work.
I think the obvious stuff of obviously our children with their diagnosis, the grieving of that life, again, that we thought we would have this typical parenting life with our children. But I know we were talking about, like Tabitha said, other relationships. For me, it really hit my friendships. I went through this grieving period of that, but I also shut everybody out. That's how I grieved. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to see anybody. And with all due respect, I don't want to have lunch with you and hear about your children. I mean, I couldn't hear about it. I was devastated. And so that turned into anger, that grief boiled over, and that you just shift as a person. And I think people don't realize how lonely it becomes. Grief just eats you alive. And I think for the five of us here, and I know I speak for all of us, but I'm speaking for myself, finding moms that truly understand this life, and it, I know that sounds so condescending, to some people.
And the complicated feelings that go with it.
Yeah, the big feelings that go with it. I know for me really saved my sanity and my heart, to be honest.
Going off what you're saying, Jen, and what Rachel said, Tabs was hitting on this too. Like, we all have the right to grieve. And so I don't want to make this about this. And we've talked about this in a previous episode, but parents out there or anyone grieving, never let someone tell you that you're not allowed to voice your grief. It's healthy that you're doing that and that you're expressing yourself. I think us as bloggers all the time, we're told to be silent. We're told that we're, making it all about us and this and this and that. And it's like, yes, in some ways that can happen with people, but we're expressing ourselves because we all have read stories about moms or parents who are not able to, and that silence kills them inside because they feel like they can't express themselves because it sounds like they're complaining, but they deserve to have a voice and say, this is hard for me. And that's how they're going to come to the acceptance and the compassion they need to, is by voicing it. So don't ever feel like you need to be silenced. And if someone's trying to silence you, tell them to suck it.
And there was another thing that I read that said, the only way through grief is to grieve.
Yes.
So if someone is trying to squash that, if someone is trying to like not allow that, then you're not able to grieve. If you don't grieve, you can't move on to the next stage. And I want to clarify by saying, I don't want to traumatize any of you newly diagnosed moms. You don't live in the grief 24/7. In the beginning, yes, it is like an open wound that's just pouring. And in time, that heals. And sometimes there's little slivers, there's little slivers that reopen that at different times. But, you are able to move on. I am very grateful and happy. And Alyssa brings me so much joy to my life, to our family's life. She makes us laugh every day. So, I'm not over here in that frame of mind anymore. Every once in a while, if I think about something, or, like Travis said earlier, sometimes it could be a song, it could be just some little thing that, may trigger that. And I get over it quickly. I feel the feelings. Maybe I'll get sad, and then, I might talk about it with one of you guys or with my husband, and then I move on. It's like it didn't even happen. Another thing I wanted just to mention quickly was, I think for something that shifted my perspective personally was when Alyssa was 4, Neil's mother was diagnosed with pancreas cancer. She was 48 years old, and I've written about this. And they gave her 6 months to live. I mean, I was 26 at the time. I ended up getting pregnant later that year with Kara, and she ended up living for 2 years. And that, I think, shifted my perspective, because that was a different type of grief, because that was
Yeah.
actually losing somebody that I loved. And that was the first person I really lost. Like, my grandparents had passed away, but they weren't in my everyday life the way my mother-in-law was. My mother-in-law was here beside me every step of the way with Alyssa, and she would come and she would help us, and she loved Alyssa and advocated for her like nobody else. So it was such a different type of a loss. And then it made autism really not seem like the end of the world by the end of that, because I had another baby. We eventually lost his mom, almost 2 years later. And it just put it into a different perspective, which, of course, there was, I'm always sad if Alyssa has to struggle or be hurt. I don't want to see any of my kids struggling. As a mom, if you can't fix things, it hurts you. But it shifted that grief, I think, for me, because we lost somebody. We still had Alyssa. We could still hold her and snuggle her. And
Grief with a finality is different than grief without.
yeah. And she was even when she was really hard, she still had lots of joy. She still had lots of laughters and giggles. I mean, I always say she's happy till she's not.
Mhm.
That stands true even today. But I think that for me, like, just shifted my perspective. And obviously having another baby and her, being typical was a huge relief. I know I'm not supposed to say that, but like, it was. And it allowed me to fill some of that void that I think I had with Alyssa, because I was able to do more typical things with her. So that did also, I think, help. It helped heal me a little bit. And then I had another kid 2 years later, and then I don't know if that healed me or like made me insane, but like I just didn't really have a lot of time to dwell on it. So life went on.
The other thing about grief that I've thought about a lot, not only from my own perspective, but watching my family grieve, and
Mhm.
a lot of that grief lives in a fear of the unknown. And so, like with our kids' autism diagnosis at the beginning, unless you've had some experience with autism before, which I did not,
Right.
you know nothing. And so you don't know what that's going to look like for your kids. And still to this day, I mean, Nora's going to be 4. So I don't know what that's going to look like for her long term, but I understand so much more, which kind of chips away at the grief a little bit, because as you learn, and it's the same with loss in general, like my fear about being alone and my fear about parenting solo, and when you lose someone, the reality that you're never going to see them again lives in a fear. And how are you going to do that? How are you going to manage your way through? So there's so many layers to grief that I think if someone is dismissing your grief, there's a lack of understanding of that complicated layer of loss that lives there, and no matter what it looks like.
I have to give myself grace for the people that have not experienced this, that don't understand me.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like, I'm like, oh, well, bless you for not getting this thing. Like, lucky on you that you don't get like the gravity of what this is. This isn't like Rachel chose to stay at home and then like gets to play glitter makeup with her kid.
Mhm.
This is so cute. Look at how many things she gets to do. No, it's not like that. Actually, like, we just all know what it is. This is the 14th episode or this is the series. The thing that I will say more than any other thing though is that sharing freed all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Sharing helps you to process feelings that would turn to grief if left alone. For me. And I feel so strongly that like I shared to help people to not get left behind as I was learning so quickly, meaning I would learn about scripting. So I would write about what this is and how this shows up for us. But then suddenly moms were messaging back like, oh my God, Daniel Tiger, me too, or whatever. And you suddenly start creating these bonds. Like, it's not just that I'm throwing out this life vest for someone, it's that I had to build a life vest to throw. I extended it to someone, like it just comes back and it saves me time after time, way after way, like layer after layer. It's true for all of us, even if it's putting words down lets them out of your rattle fritz in the head. Amy, do you listen to Harry Potter to go to bed tonight at night right now, or are you letting us hear all your feelings enough that you don't need him anymore? I've been meaning to ask you that.
Oh, I need him.
Oh my God, you should get on our night calls. We're super good friends of yours. We'll help you to process. You can
I
let
love
it go
you guys.
there.
Help me process, but that's anxiety. This is a whole different.
another layer of the mind space. What I wanted to say before we quit this grief is there is no doubt in my mind. I'm really cussing up a storm on this episode, but welcome to the big feelings, people. That I could have made it through these past 2 years if we all were not friends. There is no doubt in my mind. I am so grateful for you guys. I just have to say that before I'm crying again. But
I love you. I want to say I was just talking to a mom who has an older child, and she was talking about how Kimmy talks a lot about when her child was diagnosed, how she had no one. And not just with autism or the situation, but like Jen was saying, it helps so much to find people. And I'm saying this as a total introvert, awkward person, but it helps so much to have people around who can understand you and or understand what you're going through. And because we were just talking about how she sees moms getting to like a much better place way quicker than when her child
100%.
Because and like the internet, social media has a lot of issues, but it is amazing that you can find people, and how hard that is to find people. Because even if I might be able to find a mom near me who has an autistic child, but that doesn't mean we're going to mesh and get along. I've found these 5 women who Kimmy likes to say we would never be friends otherwise, but
he does say that.
She does say that a lot.
We get along and like we're able to, and we just know each other, and nothing proved that to me more than when we finally met in person. It was like, it literally, like, again, as a weird, shy introvert person, it literally felt so comfortable for me. I was like, oh, these are my people. And
that's because we survived naming our podcast, James, and the color of the podcast.
Well, it's like I picked Jamie up from the airport, and like we didn't even miss a beat. Like Neil put her luggage in the trunk, she jumped in, and we just started chatting up a storm the whole ride. It was like,
I fought with Neil about trying to pay for his water at the hotel.
I think if Jen was a full-size person, we would have just gone full swing too. But I had to realize that she was like a 3/4 scale, and and then we were right off.
She literally ran across the lobby entryway and jumped into my arms. We were like matching sizes. Well, she was a lot smaller than me.
No, but it's fine. It'll be fine in April.
So what it comes down to is we want all of you to be heard, to be seen. We understand the feelings. They're normal feelings. Everybody has a right to them. And grief is love. We grieve because we love. And I think that's what you have to keep in mind. Don't let anyone make you feel bad about it or make you be quiet about it. Don't be quiet about your feelings. You don't have to talk about it. But we want to thank you guys, and then our next episode will not be so sad and heavy. We're not going to cry on our next episode.
We can't guarantee that. We cannot guarantee that.
For yourself.
We can, because we actually already recorded it. So.
Oh, just kidding. It's a good one. That's true. We did.
Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us at the table for this episode of the Table for 5 No Reservations podcast. We have new episodes every Monday. If you'd like to become a supporter of our podcast, please check out the link at the bottom of this episode's description. Please make sure to follow, rate, and review us wherever you listen. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram for more content. We also now have a newsletter. Check the description for where to sign up. Thank you for sitting with us at the table. See you next Monday.